new episodes of The View when she tries to pull the race card.
Yes.
And then she's like, America is racist. And then they're like, yeah, they might be racist, but they're not like slave owner racist. like somebody that we
That's so true.
Yeah.
One thing, and I would have even actually not give her any, is she said, well, like, I guess that's just what they did back then.
Yeah.
She should have followed that up with saying something along the lines of, and I understand that that's a departure from the way I've talked about this before.
The joke hit like a lightning bolt, sharp, precise, and impossible to ignore. The audience erupted, but Gutfeld wasn't just cracking jokes for laughs. He seized the moment to expose what he saw as glaring hypocrisy, and he didn't hold back. For years, Sunny has built her platform on demanding accountability, especially when it comes to historical injustices. She's been vocal, loud even, about how ancestry shapes moral responsibility, pushing the idea that people must acknowledge and atone for the past. But when the conversation turned to her own lineage, the energy shifted. Instead of confronting the uncomfortable truth head-on, she brushed it off like it was just another footnote in history. Gutfeld wasn't about to let that slide. With razor-sharp precision, he pointed out how identity politics can backfire when personal narratives clash with inconvenient realities. It's easy to call out others, but what happens when the same standards are applied to you? Sunny had spent years holding people's feet to the fire over their ancestral ties, until the heat was turned on her. Suddenly, the rules changed. Gutfeld's breakdown was brutal yet calculated. He didn't just highlight the contradiction. He stressed why self-awareness is crucial when diving into weighty topics like race and history.
It is funny. She's so wrapped up in identity and she had no idea who she was.
Well, now we understand why she always makes Whoopi get the coffee.
Exactly, because if she is shaming descendants of this, will she continue to do that when she is now one of them?
He laid it out plain and simple. If you're going to use ancestry as a moral yardstick for others, then you better be prepared to measure yourself by the same standards. And here's where the real irony kicked in. Sunny, who has long condemned the legacy of oppression, found herself tied to the very system she so passionately decries. But instead of taking a moment to reflect, acknowledge, or even address it, she sidestepped the issue completely, almost like it wasn't worth discussing. That reaction? It didn't sit well with a lot of people. Gutfeld's commentary hit home for those who have grown tired of the selective outrage that often comes with moral grandstanding. It was a stark reminder of what happens when self-righteousness collides with inconvenient truths. And in that moment, Sunny's credibility, at least in Gutfeld's eyes, took a serious hit. For Gutfeld, this wasn't just about Sunny. It was a prime example of how personal accountability often takes a back seat to performative outrage. And once the internet got wind of the situation, it was game over. Social media went into full meltdown mode. Memes, jokes, and hot takes flooded the internet at lightning speed. One viral post summed up the irony perfectly. Reparations? Let me write that check to myself real quick. Twitter and TikTok turned into battlegrounds of sarcasm and heated debates. Some users defended Sunny, arguing that she shouldn't be judged for the actions of her ancestors. But a whole lot of people couldn't ignore the glaring. For years, Sunny has built her brand around demanding accountability, insisting that others must reckon with their family's past, even if they had nothing to do with it. But when the tables turned, when it was her history in the spotlight, she brushed it off with a casual, almost dismissive shrug, calling it just a fact.
In her defense, everyone has ancestors that did unspeakably horrible things. It's just that not everyone's ancestors have records tied to their DNA about it. Worried for Sunny Hostin's progeny in the future that do a DNA test and find out that they were related to a cast member of The View. And they're like, oh, it all makes so much sense now. Why I'm so stupid and fat.
That response did not sit well with many. It sparked a massive debate. Should public figures like Sunny be held to the same moral standards they impose on others? Critics were ruthless, saying her reaction lacked the self-reflection and growth she has demanded from so many others. The hypocrisy was too blatant to ignore, and the backlash didn't just disappear overnight. It fueled discussions for weeks. But the fallout wasn't just an online spectacle. It made things seriously awkward on The View. The show, usually filled with lively debates and strong opinions, suddenly turned into an awkward staring contest when the bombshell about Sunny's ancestors was dropped. The energy at the table vanished in an instant. Whoopi Goldberg, who's always quick with a comeback, looked stunned. For once, even she seemed unsure of what to say. Sunny, who's usually fierce in her arguments, didn't have much to add. The irony of the situation was too thick to cut through. It was one of those rare TV moments where the silence said everything. Over on Greg Gutfeld's panel, the mood couldn't have been more different. His co-hosts wasted zero time diving in, throwing sharp yet playful jabs that had the whole table cracking up. One panelist even quipped, "Guess Sunny's next segment should be about shaming herself." The laughter wasn't just for show. It was their way of hammering home the hypocrisy they saw in her stance. They weren't just poking fun. They were exposing what they viewed as massive cracks in her so-called moral high ground. But not everyone took the moment as an opportunity for jokes. Rosie O'Donnell stepped in with a more measured take, offering a perspective that cut through the noise. She made one key point. People should be judged by their actions, not by the actions of their ancestors. At the same time, she didn't ignore the bigger picture.
Guess there's nothing worse than to find out you're a white woman.
She's so disappointed.
It's really disappointing.
Her mother was white.
Oh my God.
Shame.
Oh my God.
The horror. History, and finds out that this is fantastic. She is descended from slaveholders. She's descended from slaveholders, and she's been apparently getting a lot of mail about her call for reparations because it turns out she's going to be paying them and not actually receiving them.
Rosie highlighted how identity politics can often oversimplify history, reducing deeply complex issues to blanket narratives that don't always hold up under scrutiny. This revelation about Sunny's lineage, she argued, was a prime example of why these rigid narratives can be dangerous. Because when the script gets flipped, the contradictions become impossible to ignore. This divide in reactions between Sunny's critics and her defenders was impossible to miss. Some saw this as an opportunity for a much-needed conversation about personal accountability. Others believed it was just another case of identity politics coming back to bite one of its loudest champions. Either way, one thing was clear. Sunny's response didn't sit right with a lot of people. And that's when things got even more frustrating for her critics. Sunny had a golden opportunity in front of her. This could have been a moment of self-awareness, an actual reckoning with her own words and the reality of her family's past. She could have used this revelation to spark a deeper discussion about how history shapes us, how we confront uncomfortable truths, and how personal responsibility should be applied fairly across the board. But instead, she brushed it off. Just a fact of life. For someone who has made a career out of demanding accountability, that casual dismissal hit hard. This wasn't just about a personal contradiction, it was about credibility. Had she leaned into the irony, admitted the difficulty of reconciling her family's past, and used the moment to encourage real dialogue, she could have shifted the narrative entirely. But by avoiding reflection, she didn't just let the moment slip away, she made it even bigger. And now the conversation wasn't about history anymore. It was about her.
If you average out the View hosts, among the dumbest people on television.
Sunny's dumb. Certainly not the brightest person. And what she just said just doesn't make any sense. It's just like so silly to say. It's not a well thought out. It's like if you had an idea for a premise and it was totally baked and half baked and you went on stage with it and it's nothing.
Just go for it. Yeah,
there's nothing there.
This could have been a huge moment, one that reminded everyone that nobody's history is clean, simple, or free from contradictions. But instead of using it as an opportunity for meaningful reflection, Sunny's reaction shifted the entire conversation. Suddenly, the focus wasn't on historical complexities, it was on her perceived hypocrisy. What could have been an insightful discussion on personal accountability turned into yet another heated debate about double standards. Sunny's situation is a textbook example of how moral certainty can crumble the moment inconvenient truths come to light. She spent years insisting that others must reckon with their history, but when it came to her own, the rules suddenly changed. And that raised the big question: if you demand accountability from everyone else, shouldn't you be willing to hold yourself to the same standard? If she thought the controversy would blow over, the internet had other plans. Viral memes, endless social media reactions, and Greg Gutfeld's brutal commentary made sure this moment wasn't fading into the background anytime soon. Now, Sunny is at a crossroads. Does she address the backlash head-on and try to reclaim the narrative? Or does she ignore it entirely and risk letting the scandal define her public image? Either way, the timing could not be worse for her, because this isn't even the biggest problem on her plate right now. That's right, Sunny Hostin has been making headlines left and right, but not for her usual fiery takes on The View. This time, the spotlight isn't on her words, it's on her.
I want a citizen that has a policy. I mean, I'm not saying that Joe Rogan should be removed from Spotify. He's got 11 million listeners. He's got $100 million, contract as of 2020. But I do think as the podcast platform, you have to have some sort of guidelines. How about a disclaimer on his podcast that says, this is misinformation? How about removing some of the podcasts that disseminate this misinformation?
They have.
And that's
Dr. Ten, an orthopedic surgeon and the head of Hostin Orthopedics and Sports Medicine, is now neck-deep in a legal firestorm that's shaking up the medical industry. And we're not talking about some minor lawsuit. This is the big leagues. The allegations? Insurance fraud, illegal kickbacks. Brace yourself. A massive RICO lawsuit involving a jaw-dropping 180 defendants. Yeah, this isn't just some run-of-the-mill legal battle. This is a high-stakes scandal that could send shockwaves through the industry. The accusations are serious. The case is explosive. And the fallout? It's just beginning.